So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, wherever you are, whether it's tonight for you in the morning or in the middle of the afternoon. It's almost the nighttime for for me on my side. I'm very excited to have three amazing experts with us today who will share their experience on what are the common security mistakes that they met during in their career, whether it had to deal with the different acquisitions, different mergers, merging different brands. And I really hope you all can learn a lot from this panel. The goal for us is just to share the experience. Don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat. We'll address them whether in an interactive manner or at the end of the session. So if you have any specific questions, yeah, just let us know. And so today with us we have Chris Lindsey, who is an application security evangelist. He has a lot of experience in sharing his application security background. I think over 15 years, right, Chris, of a direct security experience with the. You basically built a lot of application security programs from scratch. You worked for several years on this topic and saw how those programs, matured. And maybe you can also, share with the audience what was your specific experience with the M&A process.
Absolutely. So welcome, guys. My name is Chris Lindsey. I have over 35 years of software development. And then as Alexandria mentioned, I also have a lot of years under my belt for security. As part of that, I was on both sides of M&A. Most of them were the acquiring company, where we were acquiring other companies. And we learned a lot through trial and error, what works well and what doesn't. So I'm looking forward to sharing that information with you guys.
Yeah, I think everyone is very curious about that. And now, our next expert is Izar. So Izar is a senior principal security architect at the large entertainment provider. Well, you can look him up on LinkedIn to know more. So he had multiple security-related positions at Datadog, and Squarespace, right? Many other companies, and you can also check out our podcast again of threat modeling, because Izar is also threat modeling expert. So if you can share, Izar, what is your specific experience, with M&A with audience as well?
Right. So I don't quite have the experience that Curtis and Chris bring to the table, but my experiences with M&A were being in the team that was being bought and sold and acquiring and being acquired and all that good stuff, and sort of looking at the thing with a critic eye from the inside. So that's where I hope to focus whatever I bring to the table today. But looking forward to listening to you guys' experiences and learning from it.
Yeah, I think the goals for you guys to share your experience, with each other, and maybe you can apply that as well. And the last expert on the panel, so I'm very excited to introduce you to Curtis. So Curtis has been at the, I don't know, has a lot of years of security experience in the back. He worked at Snap and now at Booking.com, and now he's at Gen, who is a leader of multiple security brands that you might heard of, like Avast, for example. And Curtis, maybe you can share your experience, how you deal with an M&A and how you've seen it in your career.
Thanks for that great introduction, Alexandra. And I'd also like to say thank you for calling me an expert, because in my mind, that just means I've stepped on enough landmines to know where they are. And, as the others have mentioned, I also have experience on both sides of the M&A, having been acquired and having acquiring many companies, and having done that in a startup culture as well, as part of startup at Snap. That's what companies do, is they go public and then they acquire a bunch of other companies. And so along the way, I've learned a lot of lessons that I think are pretty important that could help make this easier for people who may be coming to this for the first time.
I think it's great to see that all of you have such diverse backgrounds. So I think all of you have, used something unique to bring to today's session. And I think, in the beginning, we're just going to, I think, on today, as we already introduced, each other, maybe talk a little bit, as you mentioned. So each of you had a different experience. So what kind of, specific types maybe of M&A you had to deal with. That's going to talk about that. Then we're going to cover how do you deal, with your diligence. How what should organizations prioritize? How do you handle cross-national border due diligence? Then we're going to talk about security cultures. How do you assess it before you start the merger, and how do you deal with that after it happened? What to do post acquisition? How to integrate all the data, all the tools. So for everyone, don't hesitate to ask the questions in the chat throughout the whole session. So maybe we can start today with the first question. Since you already introduced yourself, maybe it could be also great to add on the top of that, what was the unique part? What are the types of different M&A models you had to deal with? What was specifically unique about your experience? So Curtis, you were the last. Maybe you can now start as the first.
Sure. So, we've had a lot of discussion on this and preparing for this, and I think that this really sums up how you want to look at an M&A. Often we think of an M&A as a full integration, meaning, hey, we're going to acquire some company, we're going to be acquired by some company, and everything is going to go, in. Like, hey, we're all going to become part of this new entity. That's sort of how we all conceptualize M&As. The reality is that's not always the case. Sometimes you will have partial integrations where the acquiring company knows that they only want a portion of the business, or they know that they're only going to do certain bits and pieces with it. And so you may not get a full integration with that. And then that even extends into the third style that we have listed there. That's the arm's length, where, hey, maybe they know that we're acquiring them for a particular period of time. I can tell you that having this experience during the startup, like, we knew we were going to acquire somebody, but having them come fully inside opened us up to other things that we didn't really want to have as part of our business. We wanted access to the data, and we wanted access to certain intellectual property, but we also knew we might spin them off someday. So they were sort of held at arm's length in such a way that we could actually cut the cords and sell them off and not cause any sort of major architectural change to our organization. And then the last one there is an intellectual property, which also happens pretty often, where they say, hey, look, we want the IP, we want some key people, but we're not taking any of your operations. Maybe we're not taking a large number of people either. We're acquiring you because we want the intellectual property for some purpose. And I think that's sort of where you need to start with a lot of these questions. Is like, if you're part of the team that's coming in very early on these, you want to know what kind of M&A they're looking at. Like, hey, what do we want to do with this thing when we're done? Are we looking to grow our business? Are we looking to augment our business through a full merger? Or are we doing the bare minimum where I'm just acquiring some IP? Because that's going to level set the sort of activities you need to undertake for what happens next. And you have several sort of rounds of this that go on. And I think we're going to get into those in a little bit later, but I think it's good to understand where you're starting from. And I'm just going to reiterate for everyone here, like, I love questions, so please ask them in the chat if anything we say resonates with you. I love questions. This isn't like a prepared speech, so we want to hear from you too as part of this. So I'm going to pass it back to Chris, because I see him making a bunch of nods there, and see what he has to add about this.
You know what, you said it pretty well. When you're looking at what type of acquisition, you're absolutely right. It changes the approach, it changes every aspect of what you're doing. When you have and we're going into a lot of great detail coming up, so I really don't want to go down this rabbit hole, because it would be too easy for me to get ahead. So I'm just going to leave it there. But knowing what kind of integration you're going to have with the company that you're acquiring is absolutely key for success down the road.
So maybe now it's you, Izar, who hasn't spoken out on the subject yet. Don't worry, we're going to ask everyone.
So the fun thing about the different types of integration, I think, and Curtis, when he compares that, like the whole thing with a field of landmines, I think it's the best analogy, because at the end of the day, you can stand in front of it and sort of see where the terrain got disturbed, but you don't know what's the size of the thing that lies underneath, and you know that it's going to explode on you if you get near it. But from a security team point of view, when you get pointed in the direction of the minefield, it's easy to come and say, okay, what is the integration type that you are hoping to happen here? And many times, at least I did, here we don't know yet. Just tell us what's the hit for the security side of this thing here. So I think that we're going to talk a bit more about it later on, but there's the consideration of how we bring this in, how we manage this, what happens with the people who dealt with the security before, and are they staying? Do they exist? So all those questions, I think we're going to check them out in a bit.
So it's actually M&A, it's like a war, because you talk about minefields and all the time. So I think like the whole discussion was about it. So it's like
we can change it to a house of horrors, because you never know what's around the corner.
But you know, I don't quite think that it's a war. Of course, it has. We're using the analogy, but I think that it's more like one of those dating shows that you see somebody sitting on the side and asking questions from people that they can actually see and deciding which one they're going with, especially when you're looking at like multiple acquisitions at the same time and you have to sort of decide. Then decision becomes, hopefully, I would pray that it does, becomes a factor in the decision of who should we acquire, given the many options, because of the amount of investment that we're going to have to put in to make security comply with our standards or not. Right. So to me, it's more like a dating show than war.
And how long?
And I think that's a great lead into the due diligence question as well, because I also see in chat where, he's asking when's the right time to make some of these requirements. And I'm going to be honest, that can be a really difficult decision at some points. Partly because when you're doing a merger and an acquisition, there are different amounts of data and types of data that you get, because to some degree regulations and regulators prevent you. So it's very much like a dating show. In the early part, you exchange a bunch of public information, you sort of make some decisions about stuff. Maybe you look through their financials a bit to make sure that things sort of line up. And on the technology side, you may get an initial look at some of their technology and how it was built and maybe their stack, but you're not going to get a deep look yet. And that's because they want to prevent, in a lot of these regulations, they're trying to prevent you gaining access to intellectual property that you might not otherwise get. Like, hey, maybe I'll go into an M&A cycle and then change my mind. Well, I've just gotten all this intellectual property I can run away with and maybe make my own competing product. So there are some regulations here that do prevent you from getting certain things early on. So in the early stage of M&As, you're often only looking at financial data. You're often looking at some of the basic stuff in their tech stack, trying to make some of these decisions, and you're getting an idea of who some of the key players may be. But the contact between the two organizations is purposely limited by law for some of these reasons. And so you're making decisions based on sort of imperfect data. As the acquisition sort of advances and you get those permissions, you get deeper and deeper into data. And you get deeper and deeper into systems, you get deeper and deeper into asking questions of people and being able to gather that data. One deal closes and it's actually approved and the regulators have given their blessings. Then it's sort of, the door is open. You get to see this person behind the screen, as Izar was describing there. And you can get a full picture of what's going on. So you end up sort of doing different stages of what you have to do along the way. So when's the right time to set some requirements? Well, the requirements are going to change and the priorities are going to change as you move through these sections of data. And the risks you identify are going to change as well. And so I think one of the key things to keep in mind about M&A is that it's not that you set a plan and run, it's you set a plan and then you start and then you rewrite the plan and then you get some more and you rewrite the plan again. And even after the merger is complete, you might have to rewrite the plan again, depending on what more as you learn as you go along. Like, because there are times where like, okay, the deal is done, and now we get to know this key piece of information, and that completely changes the direction we have to go on something.
Right, right. And one thing that as you're moving down the path of acquiring a company, one of the things to make sure is you find a third-party company that will actually look at the code, review the code, give you the vulnerabilities, give you, some, at least from a security standpoint, what libraries, what licenses, what's out there. You're, as the company acquiring another, typically you're not privy to the source code or anything, but when you have a third party that can act as an intermediary between you and them, who has no stake in the game, their only job is to review, hey, what kind of tech are we actually acquiring? And it's amazing what typically comes out. I've been on both sides where we were acquired and we were acquiring, and I've also been where I've led teams that actually did this kind of thing for companies being acquired. And the nice thing is when you're sitting there, if you're the company that's acquiring another one, you want that peace of mind. Are we going to be buying, and this is that Landmine thing, are we going to be acquiring this company that is riddled in tech debt or riddled in licenses that's going to bite us once we get the acquisition through? Are they in a good security posture state, or are they in a terrible? Do they have any kind of security implemented or not? Because it's one of those things where as you're going through the M&A process early on, it looks all shiny, it looks all bright. They always bring their best foot forward. They always make these promises. They always talk about these things that our company is this and our company is that. And then once you start peeling back those onions, once you start looking at the financials and really look at what's going on underneath, the covers, that shininess starts to dull a little bit. And the question is when you start looking at the tech, which is where I'm more familiar with, that aspect of it can really be a make it or break it.
It makes me think of the Silicon Valley episode, where they go to acquire a company and then they discover they haven't done proper age verification. I can promise you that's not a farce. That has happened to enough companies that writers know about it and they put it in their show. And that is something else you start to worry about. You have to think about the regulations about what you're acquiring. Like if you're acquiring a user base, what is that user base? And what regulations in the countries they may live may affect you that you may not have had before. I can remember when Snapchat merged with Luxury and we picked up a company in the Ukraine, and that was like, okay, this is a whole new ballgame for stuff we want to do. The Ukraine has different rules around how we get certain tech to them. At the time, we were using YubiKeys for very high-end two-factor authentication on our engineering workflows to make sure that we couldn't, we were trying to combat phishing and other things. We couldn't ship YubiKeys to them because that was a restriction in their country. We had to find a supplier in Ukraine to be able to buy those things, to be able to get it to them. So you will slowly discover, some of this stuff. You can pre-plan for a lot of it, there's questions in here. Hey, are there templates in books? You can write a template on this, but I can promise you're almost never going to follow it.
No.
What we're trying to give you is a framework that you can use to build a playbook, which is what you want to do. You want to build a playbook that gets you through this acquisition. You might be able to repeat some of the steps and some of the ideas from acquisition to acquisition, but you're never going to turn it into a turnkey because the technical bits you're getting into, the regulation bits you get into that cover some of those things, and even the financials will change. Like Chris made a great point there about, hey, yeah, you're looking at the financials, but as you get deeper into, you're going to learn what those financials really mean. Like, hey, they may have a great product, but maybe they're also may have a very high cost to acquiring a new customer and getting them on board, and they've got a bunch of tech debt that's eating up their ability to make profit. So you got some of what you do with integration is going to change because the acquiring company may decide, you know what, we don't like that tech stack. We're going to replace something we've got. We're throwing this out the window. So now, hey, we're going to take advantage of that fact that they aren't efficient to get something better. Or you may be stuck with it if you don't have it. You may have to figure out how to deal with that. So that's sort of the short answer to that question from Alex, which, great question. There are books. There's plenty of books written on M&A. Most of them are written by lawyers on how to do law.
Yeah, but I want to take a gift on what you guys are saying. It could be that for the unaware listener, there seems to be a lot of process in here. There seems to be a lot of legalese in here. And from my experience, not every time it's like that. I mean, I understand what Curtis put, that many times you don't know beforehand all the information that you would need to know to make an informed decision. And I understand what you, Chris, says, that sometimes you need to bring a third party in, and then you have code in escrow and people translating between both sides. But what I'm missing here, because of my limited experience, are these musts? Do you always have to have somebody in the middle that's going to do that translation? Because sometimes I was asked to do it, and I was in the side that was buying. So as part of our due diligence, our security team jumped in and did that stuff, right? And then to Curtis' point, the limited view that we could have in the information available sometimes became, hey, what's your threat model, right? I had to say threat model. Sorry, guys, I had to. But sometimes that was like the only question that I could ask, right? I couldn't go and say, show me your code, because that would reveal all the IP, that would reveal a bunch of the stuff. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, what are actually the limits of how heavy the guns have to be when you start this whole thing?
And I'm going to give you the lawyer answer. It depends, because I have done both, and some of that depends on the skill set of the company. I can tell you that when we acquired a company that wasn't a tech company, like I was working in healthcare, and we acquired another company and they had some tech. And one of the things my job was to do as the security architect was literally go in. I'm standing at the door waiting for the lawyers to tell me I have permission. And then I go in and like, all right, I'm going to sit down with your developers. Tell me how you develop your code. What are your steps for it? Where do you store it? What do you do? How do you do this? All right, now I'm waiting for the lawyers to tell me I can do the next step, which is actually to look at the code or run some of our tooling against it. And I'm doing some of that work now. Like I run an application security team, and part of our role is to run these tools that scan our code. So when we get the permissions, we're often bringing it in-house and scanning it with our own tools and looking at it with our own people. But that's a question of expertise. Do you have that expertise? Some companies do, some companies don't. If you've got that expertise, say in application security, which is the one we're really talking about, that can look deeply at code, yeah, you probably want to do that yourself. There are instances where you sort of have to do sort of what Chris is talking about, because you don't yet have the full permissions to look at that stuff and you want a deeper look. That's the only way you're going to get it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Cool thing.
And that's going to be a case by case thing. Like at the same time I'm looking at the code, the IT security guys are probably over in the IT space asking questions about the process of how they acquire things, how they secure things. Hey, where are your policies and standards? That's usually the first thing we get to look at. Hey, what are your policies and standards for how you build and manage stuff? Do you have architectural drawings for this stuff? Did anybody document anything? Or is this all like, hey, I don't want to fire anybody or have anyone leave the company because they don't like, they don't want to be acquired if they have key knowledge. That's the other problem, is you're going to have people who have institutional knowledge that's probably not written down that you've got to go figure out. So there's a huge human element here that I think we're going to talk more about a little later as well, that fits into this.
Yeah, I think there is a question from Kevin as well that actually is very relevant to what you've been talking about. So are there longer running processes related to security due diligence that should begin as soon as possible during an M&A? Like if you can, summarize maybe one or two, any tips or stories?
Sure, I'll go. So when I was running, at one point I was running the portion of auditing for the company I was at for a security tool vendor. And frequently we would have companies come to us and ask to do scans across, SAST and SCA, software composite analysis, static code analysis. And we were looking at trying to identify, what were the risks for the company being acquired. And it was always kind of fun when you get on the call, and I always wanted to make sure the company that was doing the acquiring and the company being acquired, the code owner, were always on the call together with me, because I would start off saying, hey, my name's Chris. Here's what we're going to do. I have no stake in the game. I say that because when they understand that I'm completely impartial, and I tell the guy that's being acquired, the code owner, I'm going to work with you. If you don't work with me, guess what? The acquisition company is going to know, because they're going to be included in all my emails. And if they see tons of emails going to you saying, I need your time. I need your time. Come on, we need schedule. They're going to know. And the other thing that comes out of it typically is once you do have the scans and you're working with them, one of the questions that if you are on the company being acquired, you can ask the company that's acquiring you, can I have a copy of the reports, but don't assume that that's a given. But it's always kind of fun because at the end of the day, it's a tough spot. So if you're listening to this and you're the company that's acquiring other companies, don't ask the companies, should we do this? Because that happened every acquisition that I was part of, that I was doing the auditing. The company that was doing the acquiring would always ask, hey, you've seen the code, you've seen everything. Typically when we did our scans, we didn't actually have access to the code. We made sure that scanning was happening on the code owner side and we had good results. So that was our protection too, to make sure that we didn't have it. But sometimes we did. But the reality was, when your company doing the acquiring, don't ask the auditor if what do you think? Should we go ahead and acquire them? Because their answer, which was always my answer, I'm giving you the facts. You've got to make your decision off the facts. Simply because if I say yes or no, then that kind of makes the auditor kind of in a bad spot. So just don't ask that question. But it's always kind of fun to see how it all boils down.
I want to take a short stab at that one, Curtis, if I may. That was great from the point of view of the acquiring company. From the point of view of the acquired company, one thing that I've seen happen a lot is that people forget that it's very much in the interest of the acquired company most times that the process succeeds, right? People want their exit. People want to go do the next shiny thing, or they want to retire. And one of the longest processes that to me has been part of putting out that good face is the documentation. And that goes to what Curtis and Chris said. Sometimes you have the institutional knowledge. Sometimes things have been moving so fast in creating the product to be acquired that we know that we are not very good at documenting things, at keeping everything up to date, and especially assumptions that were done along the way. So I think that it's very much in the interest of the being acquired company that their stuff be in order, that they have some sort of folio to put on the table and say, these are the things that we did regarding security. This is what we thought that would be reasonable for us to do. And now you can tell us if that's up to your standards or not, and how we start closing that gap.
In adding on top of that, if you want something that's concrete that you should do long-term, I would say it's having a risk register and reviewing it regularly. Everybody who is part of your M&A team needs to be identifying risks and ranking them and getting them on a sheet and having a regular discussion about them. Because there are going to be some risks that you just accept because you're acquiring something, and there are other risks that you're going to want to go do something about. And to some degree, that's going to be up to the leadership that's making the acquisition to make decisions about whether or not they're going to do that. But having that risk register from day one to say, here are the risks we think we've identified. Here's what we think their level of impact is to us. And here's possible mitigations. That's also another great one. Like, hey, could we possibly mitigate this in some way? Or what do we want to do about that? That's probably going to be the one thing you're going to do from the moment you start an M&A to the moment it completes, and probably even after. That risk register is going to become a living document of the things you have to do in security to make this a reality.
It's fun that you brought that up, because especially the way that you're describing it, you come many times to a startup and you say, okay, you guys need a risk register, and they're going to look at you strange and say, we have 300 other things that we have to do in the same time, and you are asking us for this really formalized process and this really formalized register of things that could go wrong and what we've done about them. And I just step back and say, you just have to have a threat model. You just have to document the things that could go wrong and what you're doing about them, and those that you can't do something about it, or that you're choosing not to do something about it, right? So I think that we agree in the content. I think that especially for startups, it might be a different degree of formalization of the process on how to maintain that information. And both, in my view, are apt. Both are good solutions. It just may happen that it may be easier to do one way than the formal other one.
Right.
So I'm not. I think there may be a misunderstanding. I'm not saying you should ask them for one. I'm saying build one.
No, you
So
should build
as
one and
you-
maintain. Understood. Yeah, like
Okay.
as the company being acquired,
I think we're on the
as part
same
of information. Yes, we are totally.
Now, one more thing that one
Yeah,
more
it's
thing.
good to see.
So one more thing to also consider as you're moving down the pipeline and getting further down the road, the company being acquired the rumor mill may pop up saying, hey, I think we're being acquired, or what's going on. And when that starts getting out, and from the developer standpoint, make sure that if you are the company being acquired and the cat's out of the bag where people do realize that you guys are being acquired, or that's at least being in process, find a way to either quash it quietly in a good way, or maybe just be upfront with your developers, because what typically I've seen, and we're going to talk about this on the post, is your best talent is when they catch wind that the company is going to be acquired. Typically what happens during the acquisition process is there's not a lot of communication to anybody outside of just a few. And as long as they can stay within that circle of a few, you're great. But when that leaks and happens where the developers and your other knowledge experts within the company being acquired find out, they're going to be your quickest ones to jump ship and go elsewhere. And so one of the things that you should be thinking about is if the cat comes out and they realize that, hey, we're being acquired, find a way to at least let your top talent know, hey, this is what's going on, and at least kind of keep them in the loop somewhat as much as you possibly can, simply because if you don't, you're going to lose your best talent.
There are legal and regulatory things that keep you from saying certain things to large groups. But I would say one of the other key things is I've used what's called a day -1 plan. So you have a day 1 plan, which is, hey, great, we're starting integration. But a day -1 plan is, what is everything we need to do the moment this sort of has to be announced? Because there is a moment, as Chris said, where you come out and go, hey, we're being acquired. And having a plan on what's that communication look like, and then what are we going to take from a technological step? Like, hey, are we basically going to freeze our code? Is that necessary? Or how are we going to escrow our code? Or how are we going to monitor and make sure that people are basically acting the way they're supposed to? We all know that they're going to be bad actors. It's just part of the world. And unfortunately, in acquisitions, they sometimes do those sorts of things. So your security team and the security team on both sides needs to be prepared for that. That, your SOC better be ready to monitor and act depending on if people do take it badly, because it does happen.
I think it's very hard to sometimes find the right words to announce those type of changes within the company, so everyone takes it well. Quite often, as you mentioned, it does not go very well. It's also partially because it depends who is acquiring you, and sometimes you can clash, the cultures between, if it's a large organization, and as you mentioned before, if it's a startup. So you already expect it's going to be a culture clash. So in this case, for example, it's very interesting to hear your opinions. How would you deal with that culture clash? Because especially, let's say, one security company acquires another, it's already, it's a security culture clash because you can expect security people there. It's a mindset clash. Startups, as you mentioned, Izar, they don't always keep track of all the things and threat model everything. So how do you make sure that integrate them securely and don't not everyone is just suddenly leaving from the company?
So I'll jump on that one. It's funny to me that sometimes people don't see the hidden costs of that integration, right? You're basically taking a problem that already exists in your organization, which is, how do I scale security? How do I get different teams that work with different parts of the tech to have the same level of security, to care about the same things, and so on. And now you are getting a completely foreign body and inserting it into the organism that you are taking care of. So basically, you are bringing in the next irritating agent into your environment. And now you have to answer a bunch of different questions. And to me, they start with, do we even have the same values? And when I say we, is the two security teams that are being involved. Do we look at risk the same way? Do we care about protecting the same things? And then bringing it to, are we sure that we want to expose all our data or to be exposed to all of their data from day one? So I've seen processes where like the most pressing integration thing was to use the correct hue of blue in the interface because it matched the big product that we're getting integrated into, right? And lots of care being taken about that. But integrating the authentication authorization of both systems, not so much. As long as we get the data and we are showing it in the pretty dashboard, life is good, right? So that's that technical problem. Then you have the culture problem of, you may even have the same values, but are you going after them with the same processes? Are you going after them with the same depth? And unless you are talking about that rare case, thank God rare case, where one side gets completely wiped out and the other side just assumes all the risk and assumes that now we're going to do things our way, you are going to have some adjustments. You are going to have some friction in there. And as we know, security departments, security teams are not well known for dealing well with friction. So now you multiply that by 2 because it's 2 different security organizations having friction between them. And you can imagine the opportunity here for some very interesting dialogue. So I think that my bottom line is, consider that a hidden cost. Factor it into the whole mishmash thing that you have to go through. And from day -1, as Curtis said, have a plan because the friction will happen and you will have to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah,
One
I
of the questions.
I think that's a great. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that I always did when I was part of the acquisition was, whenever possible, find out what kind of tooling, what kind of processes they have in place and then being able to ask certain things, because if they're doing something that you're not, such as the Security Champion program, or they're doing some other aspects, when you do get to the post acquisition phase, the security team needs to not have the mentality of, we're the acquiring company, we get to choose, we get to make, decide every aspect of it, which in a lot of ways they do. However, when you're looking at the culture of it, working together hand in hand goes so much further, because with post-acquisition, I would always call the company the moment that I could legally call them, I was already on the phone with the CEO and security team talking about what we're doing. And that transparency from the acquiring company goes a long way, because when you find out what they're doing on their side and understanding their processes, their roles, what they have going on, you may find that they may be doing something better or have the licensing for tools that maybe you wanted to get into, or the knowledge. And so working together to shape, the path is great. And then to the conversations that Curtis and Izar has had, make sure you have a plan, because when you do find out, okay, they're using these tools, we want to get them off, put together that plan and have it started, being ready to go down and be enacted, when you can, because sometimes you may want to kick it off day one, and sometimes they're doing everything right, so that now you have a little bit of breathing room to think through and kind of get it to come together.
So I'll start by adding that I think this is a change management and change leadership issue that you have to think about, and that is a whole nother discussion in and of itself that we can have. But at the same time, I think it's an opportunity. I can say from personal experience, I've been on the side where a company I was part of got acquired, and our security culture actually took over the other side because it was more integrated into what the developers were doing. We were far more on the ground with them, instead of it, versus that company that acquired us was more about, hey, we're going to manage security from a compliance and regulatory framework instead of looking at that. And so I think it was really great that we could come in and really drive a change in culture that was around, hey, we want to do best practices. We want to learn from what we have done wrong in the past. We want to learn from other people that have done this, and really come around and build a security culture that was far more integrated with the larger new company that I think has been, in the end, turned out to be very effective in getting that moved. So I think that if you're a leader and you're looking at this, that's one of the things you absolutely want to consider is, hey, where are the best practices we can learn from each other? Are there things I want to make better about my security culture that I'm going to get with the acquiring company that I can then drive? And who are the people in that company that drive it? Because I definitely want them to stay as well. This is not the technical side of that. This is the people and leadership side of it. But that mindset, as Izar mentioned, as Chris is talking about, can be super critical to whether or not you have success sooner or later. Like, you might still have success, but it may take you a lot more effort and a lot longer if you're not paying attention to that.
What was the kind of biggest pushback that you've experienced when it came to culture? Oh,
For me,
you have.
we actually had, when we merged, we actually had CISOs on both sides leave. So for a while, we were essentially leaderless. So it's like, okay, we're going to have an interim. How do we figure out who's going to do what? Where do we make decisions? Who makes the call on this? That was probably the hardest thing, because the leaders decided, neither of them really wanted to be part of the new organization. It was like, oh, now how do we lead this? A lot of us, a lot of myself included, that were in leadership positions, basically ran on that. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because this doesn't need to fall down, and I'll keep doing what I can do to make sure that the company stays successful until we have a new leader comes in and says what direction we need to go. And I think as a leader, you have to do that part. As an engineer, that can be really difficult. Like, all right, who's calling the shots here, so I know what I'm supposed to do every day. If you can avoid that situation, I highly recommend not doing that.
My worst experience came from the other side, like not to the other side, but from the bottom of the ladder. I think that having the belief that leadership, it's going to sort itself out at some point. I think that's fair to say. It has to happen, right? People leave, people stay, people change roles, and I think that one of the questions in the chat asked for that. Once I had teams with completely different security cultures have to match, and I'm talking about the developers, not the security teams. And I've had developers whose approach to security by default was, I leave everything on default settings and the tools are going to take care of it. And we know how well that works, right? So when some of those very important developers that we hoped would stay were asked to all of a sudden take a security view of the things that they were doing, then I got, no, we don't do that. I'm a star programmer. I am a 100x programmer. I write my lines of code, and security falls wherever security falls. If you want, just drop a firewall in front of this, and that's going to solve everything, right? Because we know that firewalls solve everything, and some crypto does. But to get that very, 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 very good developer to all of a sudden think about security was the big challenge, right? And to come to them and say, we would like you to take some security training. Yeah, good luck with that. So leadership, I think, sorts itself out at some point with bumps and hits, but the security culture between the different teams is the thing that I have, again, to use that word, experienced more friction on.
Now, one thing that I did that typically worked, so once we hit that post M&A, day one, I've already talked to the CEO, the security team. I always try to get with all the developers on day 2 or 3, so right out of the gate. And again, that transparency that I had with the security team, here are the tools, and here, as the acquiring company, what we do for security. When I started doing that, that went a very long way to keeping the developers. When they understood, here's what we're doing, I'm being transparent, here's how we approach security from an application security standpoint. You still have the security team that's dealing with networks, firewalls, and all that's going on too. But from the AppSec side, hey, here's what we're doing. And by the way, if you're not hearing anything from leadership, reach out to me, because I'll be more than open to converse with you and give you what's going on. And when I did that, the number of the best programmers, the people who really know the systems started to stay much longer. Before that, people would just jump. But when they had that, hey, here's what we're doing, now they have a face to talk to. They have somebody to reach out to. And when you're talking to the software architects, reach out to me with any questions. We're going to do our scans. We're going to look at your stuff, and we're going to work hand in hand. It's not we're going to do a blame game and we're going to point the finger at you and say, hey, how terrible your stuff is or how great. It's let's work together. Let's the common good is getting your stuff integrated, brought into, the overall processes and flows that we have going on that work. And, tell me more, again, when you're working with their security team, tell me how you do things, because as Curtis and Izar mentioned, they may be doing something that you're wanting to get to, like security champions or some other processes that work better than what you're doing. And when you start having those conversations, all of a sudden the security team on the other side is a little bit more relaxed and their guard is dropped, and it's not we're being viciously taken over and they're going to do this X, Y, and Z, and we're going to be forced into their way. But now those conversations are a little bit easier. And there are times where you acquire a company that's very immature and haven't really gotten too far down the securing pathway. That then changes the conversation to what you're doing. But when you work with the developers and you're like, look, I emphasize with you, we're going to work together on getting you to a good spot. Now they feel a little bit more at ease.
Yeah.
I think there is just so much to deal with and all the moving pieces to think about at the same time. So how would you recommend to deal, with the short-term and long-term priorities, like to incorporate a security training versus thinking about the security, like tech stack that you have to keep and the security of it?
So I think that for the past 40 minutes, we have been describing definitely drinking from a fire hose, right? You're getting so much information coming in so fast, and you want to integrate everything together. But something that sometimes we miss when we talk about drinking from the fire hose is that sometimes in some situations there needs to be a faucet in there. There needs to be something that slows down the fire hose. And I think that in this particular case, M&As and security, there is a justification to say, oh, slow down. Because while there's a lot of stuff to be dealt with, all the laws and regulations and marketing and communications and all that, at the end of the day, it's security that's taking the issue of, whoa, you just doubled my attack surface. Whoa, you just brought in a lot of unidentified risk that I need to address. And there was a question here in the chat saying that we often use you don't know what you don't know. How can you be sure that we identify all of your assets and software and whatever, right? And that's a big part of the fire hose. You may have done great due diligence, but still you were not married at the time, so you didn't have all the information. Now you are starting to see what it is to live with that other thing. And using that time to say, okay, we got a great thing going here, but we have to do it not in a slow way, but in a measured way, so that everybody that gets an impact has chance to understand that impact before it hits. I think that that's the most important thing here.
And I think to add on to that just a little bit, like the last part of the question that you're answering there says, hey, how do you choose what to get rid of? The answer is you don't want to do that quickly or rashly, which is what Izar is getting at. And you don't have to do it early either. What you're more concentrating on in an M&A is how do I deploy the security assets I have into the new organization to get them to a security level, or what do I take from them that they have that I want to use to bring up our security level that assures what we're going to do? Because you can make that decision about, oh, I'm going to change this or get rid of that later. That's not something you have to do early in an M&A usually. You can usually delay some of those decisions. your earlier decisions are going to be more around, hey, I think I have a really good SIEM or SOAR or whatever it is. How do I deploy that into the new organization effectively to get a view as soon as I can do that? Depending on what stage of the M&A you're in. And that's honestly what you're doing in a lot of these things. The early stages are more like, oh, we're getting a view. I'm planning on what I'm going to deploy. Now, how do I get that deployed and running for this stage? And then how do I get it deployed and running for the next stage? And you're picking up the goal and moving it as you're going down the field with these activities. You're not generally making tech stack decisions during the M&A phase. Those are going to come later. In the very rare case where you're acquiring for a IP only, you might do that. But usually you're going to take them and you're going to incorporate them and you're going to say, I'm just basically going to freeze you. And then when I have a control of the IP and I really know I've got it, then I'm going to start taking stuff apart that I'm sure I don't need, because you're definitely not going to take it apart if you're not sure about it. So I think that's the bigger lesson there, is that you got to think about this as, how do I take the tooling and the expertise that I have and how do I deploy them in a way that keeps security functioning and protecting the assets it's got to protect.
And I think we have not so much time left. Actually, we have 8 minutes left. So I just wanted to also cover a little bit the topic that we wanted to discuss about the data integration, like the data integration piece, because I think it's very important to talk about that, since it's now with more and more software being released, like it's everywhere. So what are, according to you, are actually like the biggest risks, during data integration?
I think that Kurt, sorry, Chris, I think that Curtis touched on it when he mentioned the Ukraine example.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've had a bad experience with, not quite taking into account at the time. That because you're bringing in somebody else that might be in a different sphere of influence, the data that you have may be now exposed to different laws and different governance. And that needs to be part of your due diligence as well, because you could incur costs, or you could stop being able to do something with the data that you were perfectly able before, right? And I also think that this is a very important bit of that control over the firehose. When are you going to share your data with them? When they are going to share their data with you? How are you going to do that separation so that every lawyer is happy and every piece of governance is checked? And
you've met a happy lawyer?
I did after we paid the bill. And the other thing that to me has become very clear and present lately is not only the nature of the data and how it gets stored and transferred and all that good stuff, but privacy. Privacy is something that lately has been brought up very closely with security, and I agree and disagree here and there. But for better or worse, security teams are having to deal with privacy as well nowadays. So I would just say, don't forget to look that over and see if you are incurring into new obligations as part of that M&A.
Something I'd like to add to
I
that.
also think this is another one of those things you can delay. So where you have a day -1 and you have a day 1 you have to do, this is the day +1. You don't have to integrate their data now.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing you want to make sure too is that data may have to stay in the country that it's sitting in already. Yeah. And so one of the things that you want to make sure, because there's always that temptation, I want to bring the data over and start looking at it in the data lake and seeing what's out there. You have to be cautious, because you have European laws, you have different laws all over the world. And in some cases, just exactly what Curtis was saying, day +1+, make sure that, it's okay to slow down and make sure you check the laws on the data before you do anything.
Yes.
Because the moment you pull that data out of the country, all of a sudden things become problematic.
Yep.
You may even have a whole new set of regulations. I've seen situations where, we're going to acquire this company, they do this business. Great. Now you're subject to banking laws. That has an effect not just on the thing you acquired, but on the entire company now. Because the moment you start connecting those pieces, you start being subject to those laws. So you want to make sure that you understand the data very carefully, and that when you're doing an integration, that you know what you're getting into.
And it could be something as separated as, oh, you guys don't have a backup of your data? Cool, let's do the backup and keep it together with our data. And now all of a sudden you have a corpus of data that answers a completely different set of requirements, just because you backed it up together.
And what is the best way, to educate yourself on those requirements? Because if you suddenly have to read the hundreds of
Ask
pages.
the lawyers a lot of questions.
Yes, the lawyers.
But the right lawyers.
Should do the
Yes.
Okay.
International lawyers, the ones from there. And because the other thing too is sometimes who has access to the data as well is also important, because in some laws and some places, a United States person cannot have access to data overseas, or vice versa. So you also have to be cautious there too.
You may have segregation of duties issues as well, depending on the regulations and the data. So yeah, take your time on that one.
So as I understood, your biggest ally is the lawyer at the M&A process. Well, who are the other people that you really have to communicate with? Well, apart from the developers during this, let's say, the first month post acquisition.
Yeah, you're gonna spend a lot of time with lawyers. They tend to be specialized in doing mergers and acquisitions. You're going to want to talk to your privacy lawyers, privacy counsel. They're going to be really good allies for you. If you're in a European company, you probably have a representative from the local data representative from the country. You can ask them questions. They're there to help you understand what you have to do and help you do it correctly. So if you don't know, ask. The worst thing in any security is assuming you know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
If I may be a bit cheeky here, one of the people that's most important for you to talk to is future you. We spoke about making plans. We spoke about controlling the fire hose. You have to be in a position where you can ask yourself, what is my problem today? What are the problems that I'm going to solve tomorrow? And separate those very well so that you can build those plans that we mentioned. Because there is sometimes a drive to solve everything in one fell swoop so that the integration just happens and everybody is happy. But if you don't give yourself the space to say, okay, this is something that I'm going to solve today, this is something I'm going to solve tomorrow, and this is a problem that I can't solve and I better go and talk to someone, life is going to be much harder than it actually needs to be.
And it always takes longer than planned. When I was working with developers and we were, deciding timelines and things, I always thought, well, how long would it take me to do it? And then I always doubled it for the next best developer. And then if I had somebody new, then I would add a little bit more time on that. So when you look at the acquisition and say, hey, you've got billions of records out there, come up with a good number, and then probably consider just doubling it to be safe, because it will always take longer than planned.
Yeah, I'm sure I probably in some cases it takes years as well to finish the whole process. Well, I've been at the company where it took 3 years to do the whole acquisition process. So, it takes definitely a while. And so we're at the end of the webinar. And one last question I want to ask to each of you. If you could summarize, in one sentence or a couple of sentences, like one key advice, that you would like to give to someone who is now starting, to go through their M&A process, whether on acquiring side or being acquired, what would it be?
Okay, I'll go first. I think that I would take a page out of Physician's Handbook. They have this motto, this oath, I don't know what it is. First, do no harm. So approach the situation from a point of view where at most you're not going to break something that's working.
Mm-hmm.
But as you bring all that stuff in, make sure that slowly you are opening things without opening them more than you actually intended to. So first, do no harm.
I would say
I'm going to steal a page from Ted Lasso and say, be curious, not judgmental. If you can maintain your curiosity and ask the right questions, you're going to save yourself a lot of problems.
Nice.
communication goes a long way.
Yeah, it's actually you've all summarized in exactly one sentence. I did not expect that. Well, thank you so much, Chris, Curtis, and Izar, for sharing your experience. I think we even didn't actually have time to to talk about everything we wanted to. In the end, well, thank you so much for sharing knowledge, and that was definitely a lot of learning.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for hosting, Alexandria, and thanks everybody for attending. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
I enjoyed this.